What happens when a political newcomer, a famous last name, and a Trump endorsement collide in one of the fastest Senate races in America? South Carolina just gave us an answer. Darline Graham, the sister of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, has defeated Congressman Ralph Norman in the Republican Senate runoff, winning roughly 52% to 48% and securing the GOP nomination for a full 6-year term. And this wasn't simply a family legacy story. It was also a major test of President Donald Trump's power inside the Republican Party. The race moved at a breathtaking speed because Lindsey Graham died suddenly on July 11, at 71, after having already won the Republican nomination for another term. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster then appointed Darline Graham to temporarily fill the vacant Senate seat, making her the first woman to represent the state in the U.S. Senate. But almost immediately, the temporary appointment became something much bigger. Trump encouraged Darline to run for the full term, and she took the plunge despite having never previously held elected office. At first, that looked like a risky bet. Darline Graham had spent years in public service, including as commissioner of the South Carolina Commission for the Blind, but she was suddenly running for one of the most powerful elected offices in the country. And then came the primary. In a crowded field of 10 Republicans, Graham finished first with about 33%, while Ralph Norman came in second with roughly 24%. Neither candidate reached 50%, sending the race into a runoff and setting up a direct fight between Trump's choice and a veteran congressman. Norman had a very different argument to make. He had years of congressional experience and presented himself as a deeply conservative candidate with a stronger understanding of national security and Washington. Graham, meanwhile, leaned into something completely different. She told voters that she wasn't a polished career politician and emphasized issues closer to home, including affordability, immigration, abortion, and election integrity. Her basic message was simple. She may be new to Washington, but she believed she could bring a different kind of leadership to the Senate. But then came a moment that could have changed the entire race. During the only Republican runoff debate, Graham was asked about Taiwan and the South China Sea, two issues with enormous implications for U.S. national security. Her response was unusually blunt. She acknowledged that national security wasn't her area of expertise and said she wasn't very informed on the subject, while stressing that she supported the military. The answer drew audible reaction from the audience and gave Norman a powerful opening to question whether Graham was prepared for the job. Here's where the story gets especially interesting. Instead of backing away, Trump doubled down. He traveled to South Carolina, appeared with Graham at a rally in Myrtle Beach, and urged Republican voters to support her. Trump had encouraged her to enter the race in the first place, and his involvement made the runoff about much more than two Republicans competing for a Senate seat. It became a referendum, at least in part, on how much influence Trump still has over Republican voters heading into the 2026 midterms. And Trump's support wasn't just verbal. On the final day before the runoff, MAGA Inc, the super PAC backing Trump and aligned Republicans, spent more than $827,000 on Graham's behalf, primarily targeting voters through text messages and phone calls. That's a remarkable amount of money to deploy at the very end of a compressed campaign, especially because the organization had largely stayed on the sidelines in many other Republican primary contests this year. Then South Carolina voters made their decision. Graham won approximately 52% of the vote to Norman's 48%, turning Trump's endorsement into a significant primary victory. For Graham, it means she now moves forward to the November general election against Democrat Annie Andrews, a pediatrician. And because South Carolina has been reliably Republican in statewide politics, the Republican nominee enters the general election with a major advantage, although the November contest is still an election that voters will decide. There's also a personal dimension that makes this race unlike most Senate contests. Darline isn't simply carrying the Graham name. She's trying to follow a brother who spent decades building a political identity in Washington and who had become deeply associated with foreign policy, national security, and the Republican Party. Darline has deliberately presented herself differently, focusing more heavily on domestic concerns and her own background in public service. Whether South Carolina voters ultimately see that as a fresh start or as political succession will be one of the central questions of the November campaign. And perhaps the clearest sign of what happened here came from the person who just lost. Ralph Norman said he would support Graham rather than a Democrat and planned to call her to congratulate her. So the Republican primary fight may have been bruising, but the party now has its nominee, and Darline Graham has gone from political newcomer to Senate candidate for a full term in a matter of weeks. The bigger question now is whether this victory becomes the beginning of Darline Graham's own political career or simply the continuation of a powerful family legacy. Trump gave her the endorsement, millions of political dollars weren't necessary, but hundreds of thousands were deployed at the last minute, and South Carolina Republicans ultimately chose her over a much more experienced challenger. In the end, voters weren't just deciding between two candidates. They were deciding what comes next after Lindsey Graham, and for now, they've chosen his sister to carry the name forward. If you found this update helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Prime Wire, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest news. Thanks for watching.